kind of turn that part around in 2021. But we do have a lot of positives for coming up. Well, or from, I should say, we'll do a little bit of recap of a few things from last year. Of course, the first thing was the National Wildlife Refuge Association chose us as the Friends Group of the Year. I don't know if we've got that slide up, Jordan. Once you come out to, once the visitor center is open, you can see, oh, I forgot the housekeeping. See, you need to remind me. Housekeeping. All of you are on mute and off camera. And feel free to use the Q&A feature in Zoom at the or the chat feature at the bottom. We'll be monitoring that. So if you have any questions for any of us or for Russ, you can put that in the chat. And then we are going to do a recording of this. And so that'll be on our Facebook page following the event. It takes a little while, but we will put that on there. Okay, now next screen. Okay, sorry, I always jump the gun. So yes, welcome. Yeah, I'm Joan Van Gorp, the Friends President. We'll have, as I've started already, some of the updates. Nancy Corona is here, the Visitor Services Manager of the Refuge, so she'll give you some information about the Refuge. Rachel Rudin, who's our Friends Board member, will do the introduction for Russ Benedict. And so he will do his program then, and then we can have some time for Q&A and then just some final comments. So again, thank you very much for joining. Now we'll go. So now we'll get to the screen for the, yeah, there we go. So this is the award that they actually sent us. It's out at the Refuge right now. So if you check that out, if you come. And so we were glad. So we're one of the smaller Friends groups in the country. So it was good to get this award and be recognized for the things we've done for the Refuge. We also won the contest the night of the awards ceremony, which they ended up doing virtual. We of course, couldn't go in person to DC. So they have a consultant that is going to be coming out this year to film some videos for the Friends. So that will be nice because there'll be one that'll just be like a 2-minute general, Friends video. And he said he'll do enough recordings that we'll have some other small videos that we can use. So if we do outreach efforts or on our website, we'll be able to have that information. We also will receive some training from the NWRA for both advocacy and fundraising. So that's all coming up this year. The next thing we did last year, this was one event that we were still able to hold at the Refuge. It was the first annual, hopefully, Spurs and Tails contest. It was held the first day of pheasant hunting season, and the funding for it came from a grant through the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. And this was thanks again to Jim Johnson, who is our grant coordinator on the board. And he's always so busy with finding funding for different things from different grant sources. So of course, this is kind of like it sounds. The hunters could bring their birds in and Jim would measure both the spurs and the tails. And then we had some prizes that we were able to give out. And it seemed to be very well received. It looks like a beautiful day, but it was a little windy. The winds were like 45 miles an hour that day. So it was a little hard controlling everything, but it was nice to see people out. And it was great that we could at least do that contest since it was outside and we could stay socially distanced. So that worked really well. I think the next slide, yeah, Friends, so we don't have this. The other thing I was going to mention, we did receive last year a grant from the Jasper County Foundation, again, that Jim had written a grant, and that will be for improvements to the Savannah Trailhead, picnic table, trash receptacles, and some bike stations. So like bike repair stations. So we're hoping they are going to try to do a bike trail from Prairie City to Monroe and also Prairie City to Altoona. Will be in the works these next few years. So we think the bikers numbers will increase to the Refuge. So that will be a wonderful addition to that. The other thing we did last year was the photo contest. That we had to change also. This was the first year for the Friends hosting the photo contest. Before, a Refuge staff member had kind of coordinated that, and Doreen retired. So we took that on, and originally we were going to do it the way it had already always been done. But of course, because of COVID, we switched to it virtually. And thanks very much to our board member, Sydney Allgreen Hunter. She organized and coordinated all of that because there was a lot of moving pieces of doing it virtual. And so that was great. Linda Frazier, who's one of our volunteers, helped a lot with getting the photos after the contest onto Facebook. So thanks to both of them. We'll have more info, a little bit about this year's photo contest in just a little bit. The other thing we started, and again, this is thanks to our volunteer coordinator, our board member, Sue Tu Warming. We started monthly Zoom calls for volunteers, both Refuge and Friends volunteers. And that seems like it's been really well received. It's been great to see people again, even if it is just on the computer, been able to connect, get a little bit, chat a little bit, and get some really good updates from both the Friends and the Refuge. So again, thanks to Sue, and then the Refuge staff, Scott and Nancy, Patrick and Karen. All of them have done great programs. We've had, things about the bison handling, about elk. I think there's going to be birds and plants coming up. So even if you don't volunteer at the Refuge, if you would like to be added to that, you could send us an email and we can get your email added to the list and send you the link when we have the next meetings. They alternate between I think one time it's an afternoon meeting, like at 3, and the other time I think it's at like 6:30. So the times will be in the emails. And at the end of the program, we'll have our email address so that you can send us a request if you'd like to find out about that. So it's always pretty interesting. Next, I guess, going on to 2021. So we're still kind of in a holding pattern, of course, with, the visitor center, nature store not open. That, of course, will be our number one wish, to get that open as soon as possible. And I hope we can do that as things start to improve in the nation. The one thing that is coming up in April, which we're pretty excited for, again, this is through the National Wildlife Refuge Association, and they asked us to be part of this. Their Young Ambassadors program is a new program that they've just started more like the end of last year. And it is trying to get people, younger people, it's basically like they're focusing on ages 35 and under, to be more involved, more interested in conservation, the environment, and just the refuge system even as a whole. So the first one they did was at Crystal River National Wildlife Refuge System refuge at Florida for the manatees. Unfortunately, the manatees didn't show up that day, so it wasn't quite what they thought it would be, but it is live. So you just take your chances on, what happens. But ours is going to be about the bison, and that will be Saturday, April 17th. Again, it's Facebook Live. So if you have Facebook, you can just be on there, or Instagram also. And I think it's going to be a great event because the staff is helping, board members, volunteers, they will actually be able to drive out into the bison enclosure. So I think there's, pretty much 100% chance that the bison will be there during this event. I hope you can all tune in for that. It should really be great. And if you are 35 and under, or know of someone who is, if you would go to the National Wildlife Refuge Association's website, there's more details about what this program is. And also, if they would sign up as a young ambassador, they send you a free cap. So that was a little bit of a plus there too. So, and their website is just refugeassociation.org, I think it is. I wrote it down because I forgot. Yeah, refugeassociation.org is their website. So feel free to check that out. The next thing I have just a couple little things. Memorial benches. I just put this in because this is something that's been kind of in the works the last few years. we've gotten some really generous memorial gifts from 3 different families. And so right at the beginning of last year, those benches arrived. Well, of course, we couldn't put them out in the winter. And then because of COVID, they're still sitting at the refuge. So we hope to get those benches out soon. And they were from the Lovett, Stevenson, and Nelson families. So we really appreciate their gifts and remembering us in their time. And then I think the next would be the photo contest for this year. We are just planning on doing it virtual again because we don't really know, again, what's coming up. The little bit different is we're going to have people can submit their photos just to the Friends Gmail account. And then both their photos and the entry forms, and then we will kind of process it from there. Deadline is October 1st to submit the photos, and we will have more information on our Facebook page and on our website soon. We just haven't gotten it out there yet. Then the only thing I've kind of penciled in, hopefully we can have a reception like we've had in the past for all the participating photographers and anyone who's interested in November. And that way we can hopefully show the winning photographs from this year. And if we can do it, I'm hoping to print the ones from last year also and have those mounted so people can see those too, because they were a lot of great photos were submitted. I think we had over 100 submitted this last year. So pretty good for having to switch midway through and change things. And then just a couple things we've talked about in our board meetings would be possibly a speaker series, which again would be Zoom. We talked about, just a variety of speakers and topics. And then maybe doing some smaller, I would say a little more controlled events. Every other event we used to do was, how many people can we get? You always wanted to get as many people as possible, which, that's probably not possible. So one option was possibly like a nighttime illuminated walk on the Savannah Trail, or maybe a self-guided scavenger hunt. I don't know if any of you follow Jester Park, but they recently did one with to find shamrocks in coordination with St. Patrick's Day. And so that was fun for the kids and for families to, walk the trails and try to find all the shamrocks. So, that might be an option of something we can do. So we'll have to see how that goes on, and we'll be sure and let everyone know. Then I think the last thing is we usually at each of our winter gatherings that we've had for our meetings, we have had an annual report available, hard copies for everyone. We didn't print them out, but we will have them on our website soon. So you can check that out. And the annual reports are great. They show, like I said, it'll have everything about 2020, a lot of details, a lot of gorgeous pictures and information about the refuge and the Friends. So like I said, that should be on the website soon. And there, I just want to really thank Sharon Tinker, board member, who has organized this annual report every year. She puts a lot of work into it, getting it all completed. So really appreciate that, Sharon. That helps a lot to get that information out to all our Friends members and just the public. I think for now, that's kind of all the updates I have on the Friends side. So we'll now turn it over if Nancy Corona is on. Again, Nancy is the Visitor Services Manager, and she's going to give you some updates from the refuge. So Nancy, take it on. Oh, you are on mute.
I do that almost every time. Anyway, good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining. And I hopefully have a PowerPoint presentation to give you some updates about the refuge. So I am going to try to share my screen, and I think it is available. Hallelujah. I was kind of struggling there before, so just bear with me while I get this going. And if you have any questions at all, please put it in the chat, or if you want to unmute yourself, just state your name and also what your question is. You can put it in the chat, or as I mentioned, just unmute yourself. So Probably lots of questions about what happened during this year. It's been a long year, so I'm going to provide you updates with all the different divisions of the Neal Smith National Wildlife Refuge. If you don't know me, I am the Visitor Services Manager for Neal Smith National Wildlife Refuge. That means I oversee the visitor center operations, the education and outreach programs, and as well as being the volunteer coordinator. So can everybody see my screen? Can you see a big, beautiful picture of a bison bull on there? Yes, okay, good. So one of the fun things about my job is I get to see all these wonderful photos. I also do the Facebook page for the refuge. So I just wanted to do a shout out to all the people that share their wonderful photos with us so that we can put them on Facebook and our brochures. And this is, I think, just a spectacular photo of a bison bull by Linda Frazier. She's part of the Friends, and I just wanted to give a shout out. I thought this was a magnificent photo. So what has been going on during this long, difficult year? So we closed, actually, it's been just a year now that the visitor center closed, and that's because we wanted to make sure everybody was safe. The visitors, our staff, and volunteers. So the visitor center has been closed, but the refuge grounds and trails and auto tour have maintained being open during the normal hours from sunrise to sunset. So most of the staff have been working from home, and we are looking to reopen. We don't have a date yet. We're hoping to do that in the spring, but it won't be a full-blown opening. It'll be in phases, but we have to look, we're looking at the COVID stats to make sure it's going to be safe for everybody. We do have reopening plans in place, and we're following CDC guidelines. We're following federal guidelines. So the optimal and the priority is making sure everybody's safe, and that's coming down from upper management at the national level, which I'm grateful for. And luckily the refuge has been open and people have been getting out there, and it's been a phenomenal year, especially just after COVID hit. People were looking for places to go that were safe, to social distance, and we had a tremendous spike in our visitation. I think we had 95,000 more people on our wildlife drive. So it was amazing. And I am so grateful for the Friends in so many ways, but they're just there to support us in every nook and cranny that you can possibly think of. And just the basic needs of visitors are achieved through our Friends in a lot of cases. For example, they provided a vault toilet at the Oak Savannah Trail, and that has been a huge asset because how many people could not come out to the refuge without having access to a restroom? So as always, we are so grateful, our staff is so grateful for the Friends and for the Friends members, because we couldn't do it without all of you. So thank you. So we are looking to reopen. We don't, like I said, don't have a set date, but hoping that we can do that starting in phases, maybe a few hours per week, every other day, so we can clean in between. But that's yet to be determined. So, but things are getting planned. So hopefully things get better so that we can do that. So management updates. So our management has been so involved in just making sure things are safe for the staff, for visitors. So the operations in themselves are very detailed, and they're very time consuming. Anything that's done has to go through a planning process and has to be approved. So coming into the office or any particular project we want to work at in the office has to be approved at the upper management level. So that's very time consuming. And our management team has been going into the office, and other staff members as well, limiting the number of people at one time going in. Some really great news is that the refuge acquired 120 acres last spring, and that's in partnership through the Iowa Natural Heritage Foundation and the Friends. What happens is the refuge may not have money to purchase the land at the time that it's available. So the Iowa Natural Heritage Foundation and the Friends of Neal Smith will work together, and they will purchase that land. And then when the refuge is available to purchase it and acquire it, the money will be transferred to those organizations. So lucky for us, within the acquisition boundary, which is 12,000 acres, and the refuge is currently 6,000 acres, and that's areas bordering the acquisition boundaries, the areas bordering the refuge existing boundary. So we're going to be adding, we have those acreage, and one section is north of the bison enclosure. It's about 48 acres. And then just southeast portion of the refuge is another 70 or so acres. That's what my math is not adding up, but it's about 120 acres that's acquired. And some of that's actually going to be seeded this spring, hopefully. So that's really good news. And it's a very costly project that cost $950,000 to purchase. So we're very grateful for all the teamwork and support that we have for that. And let's see what else. So our manager, Scott Gilgee, was working on putting in a proposal for the Land Water Conservation Fund, which is a proposal to purchase new land. So we're always looking to add to the refuge. As I mentioned, we can go up to just under 12,000 acres within the acquisition boundary that's approved. So he put in a proposal for that to acquire some new lands. The refuge is also continuing working with some partners. We have 5 partners in the Greater Des Moines Urban Wildlife Conservation process, and we're going through our visioning and mission statement, and then we're going into a strategy and objectives. And our partners with that are the Iowa DNR, the Army Corps of Engineers, forgive me, I forget all the time, Parks and Rec, Des Moines Park and Rec, Polk County Conservation, and the Refuge. And there's some land along the Des Moines River that's owned by the Army Corps of Engineers, and it's called the Ding Darling Greenway, which what is fascinating about it is that Ding Darling actually owned that property, him and his family, and he donated this land along the Des Moines River that is now owned by the Army Corps of Engineers. And they approached the refuge and the other organizations to help to manage that area. So what we're going to do is we're working on this visioning and mission statement, but we're going to partner together. And our goals is to get into that urban community and help them to access and enjoy those green areas within their community so they can connect to it, as well as we can go in and teach them about what we're doing with the resources. So it's a really interesting partnership. It's been progressing kind of slowly, but we're getting there. So we're really happy that we're getting into the visioning and mission process, and that's getting to near completion. And so we're really happy about that. So great partnership that we're looking forward to in our urban community. The other thing is that Scott Gilgee put together several mentored pheasant hunts, which I went out on a couple of them, and really, really fun, and getting new hunters, whether they're young, old, but it's part of the R3, which is recruit, retain, reactivate people into outdoor recreation. It doesn't have to be hunting. So we had some experienced hunters go out with people that didn't have experience and took them out and actually did some pheasant hunting, and it was a lot of fun. I got to go out and take pictures, so really enjoyed it. And then, of course, we had the Duratio. Hopefully I spelled that right. I just learned how to pronounce it. But anyway, we had some damage on our trails. So we only have a couple. We have to go through a lot of certification to be chainsaw certified. So we only have, I think, 2 people on staff that can do that. So Scott Gilgee does many things, and he was out there with some other refuge staff cleaning up the trails. Basswood and Oak Savannah really took some hard hits, and we had some signage damage, but finally the trails have been cleared. So we're in good shape there. Biology and resource management updates. They've been busy, even though we've been limited in how much field work we could do, and mostly working from home. But Karen, our refuge biologist, has been working very hard to complete a habitat management and inventory and monitoring plans, very intense, detailed documents about how the refuge is going to continue with the management of the resource, as well as how we're going to inventory and monitor the plants and animals on the refuge. Also, 500 acres of invasive plants were treated, mostly sweet clover. You can see a picture of a tractor, and that was Neal. He was out there mowing. If you're not familiar with sweet clover, there's white and yellow sweet clover, and it grows in very dense mats. and it is an invasive plant, and it can take over the prairie that we're trying to reconstruct. So it has a 2-year life cycle. So we mow it just before it sets seed. So they were busy doing that with tractors out there. Also, a very serious invasive plant is Sericea lespedeza. So you have to spot spray that, because it doesn't, mowing and prescribed fire do not kill it. So we just spot spray individual plants so that it kills that plant and not anything surrounding it. So it's very intensive, but it gets the job done, and it's well worth it because it's a very invasive plant. It produces lots and lots of seeds. So it's something that we want to tackle. Also, Neal Balman, he is a wildlife refuge specialist that started just before, he started in October 2019, and he is doing a lot of management. He's a manager in training, so he's been a second hand to Scott Gilgee, our refuge manager, and he has a lot of GIS experience, so he's been making lots of maps, both for brochures as well as for documents in biology, so really helpful. Also, Neal Balman and Scott went out and helped with details on wildfires out west. So that was a big help in just supporting the overall wildfire effort. Karen Vista Sparkman, our refuge biologist, has also been working on editing bird data. She goes out every year and she does bird surveys in the spring, a breeding bird survey. So she's working on that data. And then recently, we just purchased some seed, and we just mixed it, which is a lot of fun. You have thousands of pounds of seed, and then all the hand collected seed by interns and volunteers are then spread into this bulk seed and then mixed, and that's going to be put into a seed spreader, and then that's going to be placed on some of the newly purchased land this spring. So, and it was amazing. I should have put a picture on here, but that, I don't know how much pounds of seed, but a big, probably covered quite a, a small office space of piles of seed. And that seed was estimated to cost $40,000. So prairie seed is not cheap. And a lot of times the Friends of Neal Smith National Wildlife Refuge help with purchasing that seed, as well as purchasing the seed, and then helping the volunteers help us to hand collect the seed as well. So it's all a team effort. Some other things about biology and resource management. Unfortunately, we couldn't do the bison handling event that we do every October due to COVID-19 restrictions. So we do have an excess of bison, but that'll be taken care of hopefully this upcoming October. We do that usually, the bison handling operation. There's a facility, cattle type processing facility in the 800-acre bison and elk enclosure in the north end. So we'll do that again, and hopefully this October. And those some of those bison will be access to some other conservation herds or the refuge herds. As I mentioned earlier, the seed's ready to plant on some newly acquired land, which is great to make some more reconstructed prairie. Something really exciting to me, because bird collision, I love birds, and bird collision with windows is a really difficult and hazard for birds. And so our biologist team worked to get bird collision deterrent material put on the visitor services windows, so that hopefully will help reduce the impact from birds hitting those windows, which I'm really glad for. And also, there was some containers that we didn't grow any plants in the greenhouse this year because we just didn't have the staff going in and to maintain the seedlings in the greenhouses, but we did have some already seedlings in containers. They're elongated containers that allow the plants to grow a root system before they're planted out into the prairie. So some prairie violets and some other seedlings were planted out in the prairie to diversify the species. Also, the oak savanna, it's with lack of fire over the years, there's been invasive plants, even though they may be native to Iowa, have come in and overcrowded the oak savanna. So there's been some underbrush clearing by our maintenance person, Steve. So that's been really great. We also hosted the Christmas bird count, and we had a small number of volunteers that social distanced, and they had I think it was matched the highest number of species, high count. So that was a lot of fun, and that's done in early January. And I hope some of you got to see the short-eared owls. We had a magnificent population of short-eared owls this year. And that we had, I think one time, at least 14 counted in one evening. So it was really exciting. Lots of folks coming out to visit and see the owls. So that was a lot of fun. Hopefully you got to see some too. Our administrative officer, Carla Dykstra, she's always busy and helps wherever she can. And so she mentioned, she's restated that we closed at just about a year ago. We closed in the visitor center and started teleworking on March 17th. We actually lost one of our wonderful staff people, Doreen Van Ryswick. She retired at the end of 2019, and she's happily retired now, but we are sad to have her leave because she was such a significant part of our program. So we do miss her, but she is enjoying retirement. And the rest of the staff has absorbed, they're not going to replace her position, so the rest of the staff is absorbing her tasks and job duties. Some good news is that their theater lighting in the theater and the visitor center is being replaced as we right now. It's not totally done yet, but the repairs are in process, and the Friends of Neal Smith help support that project. So the theater will have nice new lighting so that we can host programs in there, and also the lighting will correlate with the sounds and effects of the video that we play there for an introduction for new visitors. We also got a new telephone server and system was purchased. It's not implemented yet, but it was purchased. And then Carla also took on doing the budget for several private land offices because they had vacancies. So she's always busy and lots of great projects that she does. Visitor service updates. Fortunately, we got to do some projects that were on the back burner. We're usually doing volunteer projects, or we're working with school groups to do an outreach. So we don't have a lot of time to plan and do the stuff that takes time to sit and write. But because of the downtime and working from home, we did get a lot accomplished. So we did create a new Refuge Map. It's a handout to orientate visitors. And we also revised and updated several existing brochures. Up on the Overlook kiosk, we replaced the signs with a new map and some new signage talking about the natural resources on the Overlook Trail. So when you're visiting, take a hike on that half-a-mile loop and you can see that new kiosk and this new signs. And as you know, everybody went virtual, so we had to learn really quickly how to do that. And luckily for me, I work with a wonderful park ranger, Patrick Bryant, and he's a lot more savvy technology-wise than I am. So he researched and figured out how to do to create and edit videos. So we purchased audio visual equipment, and he did a lot of wonderful educational and outreach videos. So I'm very thankful for Patrick's expertise and willingness to figure this all out. And I think this is going to be a really new, wonderful attribute to the Refuge. We just completed our on-sale app for our 5-mile auto tour, and that's being sponsored by the Friends of Neal Smith National Wildlife Refuge. That's going to be launched next week, and it is at 13 stations. There are stops along the 5-mile auto tour drive, and it's going to be an app you can download on your phone. It's free, and then it will have a narrative as well as photos to tell you about the refuge and what we do. And eventually Patrick's going to narrate that, so it'll also have audio. So look for that next week. We'll post it on Facebook when it goes live, when it's launched. Thanks once again to the Refuge friends. We were able to we're actually hosting monthly meetings, as Joan has mentioned. So we have been hosting those once a month and talking about a variety of topics and updates, and anyone's welcome to join. You can email me or Joan, and we will add you to the list. And I think it's really interesting, and we get to stay connected to our volunteers that way. We did, just before, it was in October, I think, before the closure, we were able to do 2 special events. We did National Public Lands Day in September, and then we also did the National Wildlife Refuge Week Volunteer Day, where we collected seeds. So we were able to do actually 2 special events. We usually do about 9 each year. So at least we got to do 2 this year. And then Patrick Bryant right now is at a detail at John Hines National Wildlife Refuge in Philadelphia, and which is a prime refuge for urban outreach and education. So he's there to help them out as well as to learn about their projects and process. So he'll be coming back next week. He's been there for 5 weeks learning and helping out. So really excited to see what he learned. He's been enjoying Philadelphia cheesesteaks and also going to the museums, and I think he had a lot of fun. So looking forward to hear back from him. And then last winter, just before the pandemic started, I was actually very fortunate to work in the regional office and worked with Megan Wandag, and I was working with her on volunteers and friends coordination. So that was a good experience for me to be in the regional office and learn how the higher operations went. It was cut a little short because of the pandemic and I had to come home, but I did get about a month and a half up there, which was wonderful. Another big project we're working on is we're migrating our website platform. So Patrick and I will be continually working on that, and that's going to be ready to launch in probably around November, December of this year. And so that was kind of a fast update, and I would love any questions, comments. So the floor is open to our audience, and I can't thank the Friends of Neal Smith National Wildlife Refuge board members and members, volunteers, and just all the people that support this refuge. It's a team effort that we have 7 staff. Without all your help and dedication and love and support, we could not do what we could do. So thank you so much for all your love and support. We really can't thank you enough. So please, any questions, suggestions, comments, the floor is open. Chat, just place it in the chat, or you can unmute yourself, just state your name and then your question or comment. Jordan, do we have anything coming in on the chat?
No questions yet. All guests are off camera and audio, so if you do have a question, we have a chat feature and a Q&A function down at the bottom.
And we're going to be, as I mentioned, we're going to be opening in phases, so it'll be a few days at a time, every other day, or maybe a couple of hours. We're not quite sure what that's going to look like yet. First, it'll be staff coming back, and then eventually we'll be able to start bringing back volunteers. But that's all contingent on the status of the COVID-19, how well that's doing, and hopefully it's going down rather than up. So we are going to keep an eye on that, and hopefully we'll be reopening in the spring at a limited capacity.
Great. I see 2 questions. The first from Joanne wonders if a recording of this program will be available afterwards. Yes, we'll post that on our Facebook page, and we might have it available as a YouTube link as well. Then we have a question, Nancy, from Jim. Jim asks, is it legal to hunt mushrooms at Neal Smith NWR?
You know, I need to double check. I know berries. Yeah, I believe it is.
Yes.
Let me double check that. I know berries are, and I believe mushrooms. Jim, which Jim is this?
Jim Johnson.
Jim Johnson. Let me double check. I do believe it is, but I'll get back to you on that. And if anybody else wants to know that, you can email me, or just email the Refuge general email, which is on our website, and then your question will be answered. But I do believe so, but I just want to double check that. I know berries are.
Then quickly, we just had one comment as well from Kristen, who says the window deterrent is really pretty and much less visually disruptive than others I've seen. So just a compliment toward that window protection system.
Thank you for that compliment. Kelly Jacobs, who is the biological technician, she comes back, she's coming back this season. She's a seasonal. She worked tremendously hard to get that project. And also Rachel Hainesfield, who was an intern, did a lot of background investigation on what's the best product to use. So in combination between Kelly and Rachel, that project got done. So we're really grateful for it. So, because we do have quite a few birds hitting the windows, and hopefully this is going to be a really good help to stop that.
I don't see any questions right now. We'll have a little bit more time at the end, Nancy, so if people have questions for you then, they can jump back into the chat. If you want to exit your screen share, we'll turn it over to Rachel.
All right. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thanks, Nancy.
Did I exit?
No,
Did I exit?
I think so.
Yep, I think you're good. We will, I'm going to go back into my slides and then we'll turn it over to Rachel from the board.
Okay, hi everyone. I just wanted to make everyone aware of a new fundraising campaign we have going on right now. We commissioned custom bike jerseys for the Refuge through Bike Rags, which is a little shop out of Cedar Rapids, Iowa. So we have 4 different styles available. They will be available for pre-order until April 16th, so about a month of pre-order. And then we will be purchasing some to stock our visitor center, the nature store. However, obviously they're a more niche product. So I would consider this kind of a limited edition bike jersey with a limited window of purchase. So we hope you check them out and maybe purchase them, and you'll see them on the expanding bike trail network, hopefully soon. So with that, I am now going to introduce our keynote. So we wanted to counter some of the negative messaging about bats that came out of the COVID-19 pandemic by highlighting species native to the Refuge and Iowa at this, our inaugural Spring Fling event. And who better to provide that counterpoint than Russ Benedict? Some of you may recognize this name from attending a bat program at the Refuge in years past. So Russ Benedict has studied bats for over 30 years, mostly focusing on the general biology of species in the Midwest. He has published several articles in the scientific literature on bats and has given many talks to the public and other researchers. Dr. Benedict earned bachelor's and master's degrees from the University of Nebraska, Omaha, and a PhD from the University of Nebraska at Lincoln. He has been a professor at Central College for 17 years and also conducts research on prairie conservation and ecology. So let's please all extend a warm friend's welcome to Dr. Benedict.
All right, I think I am now unmuted. Can you all hear me okay? Okay, excellent. All right, so I wanted to, I think maybe 1 or 2 of you or more than that might have seen the talks that I've done before. So I'm going to do a little bit of just kind of some intro prairie or bat biology early on, and then I want to talk a little bit about some of the specific bats that I have caught at Neal Smith. I've netted there a fair number of times, mostly as educational projects, but also during some of the research that I've done. And so I want to kind of let you know who lives there and a little bit about their biology. But first I wanted to just make a quick kind of connection. So I really got introduced to the world of nature through birds. I had a 6th grade teacher who was very interested in birds, and she took us out on lots of field trips, and that really hooked with me. And so I've been a bird lover for a long time then. And then at some point, so she was also a bird bander. And so we went out and started doing some mist netting of birds in prairies. And I started kind of asking her questions then about these weird things growing around me. And then that opened really the door to prairies. And so really I began exploring prairies somewhere in high school. And this was all in eastern Nebraska. But what really cemented me as a prairie lover and as a biologist, in honesty, was the sandhills of north central Nebraska, which is one of the largest intact prairie ecosystems on Earth, and just a spectacular area. Then at some point, I got introduced to bats. I actually got introduced to them fairly late. It wasn't until during my master's degree that I got introduced to bats. And then one really memorable experience that kind of connects bats to prairies is I was out doing some work trying to catch bats in extreme western, northwestern Nebraska, right on the Wyoming, almost on the Wyoming and South Dakota lines, but still in Nebraska. And out in that area, there's very, very few trees. In fact, the spot where we were working that night, the nearest tree was probably, 5-6 miles away. And so we were netting over a stock tank because bats would come and drink from the stock tanks out here. And I remember it was a full moon night, which I did not know as we were setting up the nets. That for bat netters is the kiss of death, because the full moon illuminates the net so much that the bats just laugh at you. But at any rate, I watched these little tiny bats, these little guys called Western small-footed myotis, which are just a little bit bigger than moths. And I watched them feeding all around me. You could see them pretty easily in the full moonlight. And they were feeding over the prairies. And so this is now out in the shortgrass prairie world. The prairies are, ankle high. And so these bats are feeding at knee high off the ground, which was just a stunning thing to watch. And so we watched that for, an hour or two. And they'd come up to the stock tank. We had this stock tank so interlaced with bat nets that there was just little windows that they could actually come in and drink from. And the windows, were as big around as a beach ball. And they were doing that. They were just kind of coming in and taking little drinks and then coming back up and out. And we never caught a single one. But it really introduced me to the idea that although we don't really think of bats as a prairie animal, they do, in fact, in places where there are roost sites nearby, they feed a lot over prairies. So I don't know exactly what kind of an ecological impact they have, but in other places, bats have a major ecological impact by eating insects. So my guess is they're probably pretty important insect predators in the prairie world. Okay, so what I want to do is just show you a couple of pictures. If you have questions, the slideshow I'm showing you actually goes on for like 50 or 60 slides. And so I've got data and all the kind of research stuff that I've done. So if you have any questions over those things, I can flip down and show you some data. But I think I'll probably just show you about 10 or so slides here and just do a little bit of intro stuff. I do have to be careful because sometimes I get pretty excited about bats, and the next thing I know, it's going to be like 2 in the afternoon. I'm still sitting here babbling. So, but okay, so a little bit. Let's see if there we go. So again, this is the slideshow that maybe some of you have seen. But what I wanted to ask you is to I like to do these as really as a quiz more than anything else, just to try and keep people engaged. It's a little bit hard to do a quiz on Zoom. So I'm going to ask you questions, and then you just answer to yourself. And so if we were meeting live, you'd be yelling at me, but now you're just going to, I guess, yell at the other people in the house with you. But bats are the only mammals capable of true flight. There are, within the vertebrate world, if we look throughout history, there have been 2 other groups that are capable of true flight. Birds are the obvious one, but who is the third? Who is the third vertebrate capable of true flight, meaning that you actually flap your wings and that allows you to increase in elevation, as opposed to the gliders who are super cool critters, but they can't flap and therefore they can only go down. Who was the third group? Well, you have to think back into evolutionary time because the pterosaurs, we think the pterodactyls and their buddies, we think they actually, at least some of them were capable of true flight. But it's really interesting to look at the wing design of birds compared to pterodactyls compared to bats. It's 3 entirely different ways of designing wings. So they very clearly came up with the idea of flight independent of each other. Okay, now a couple other questions. So here's a big one. So bats are a huge group. So there's a little bit more than 5,000 species of mammals on Earth, and almost a quarter of those are bats. So it's a very species-rich group. And so the thought is that the combination of flight together with echolocation really opened up brand new niches that no other critters were using. And that basically created essentially all of this empty space that bats could then evolve into. So lots and lots of species. But the question for you is this. So how many species live in Iowa? So if there's 1,200 species on Earth, how many in Iowa? Oh, by the way, quick little side note. if you do pay much attention to this, you realize that everything I'm asking you right now is all artificial. Because the question of how many species there are is kind of a constant argument. What counts as a species? Some people actually define species in different ways. And so according to some people, there's almost 3,000 species of bats, depending upon how it is that you actually define them. Plus, on top of that, we're discovering new things all the time. So this is not a stagnant number. Okay, but I distracted myself there. So back to our original question, how many bats in Iowa? The answer to that is 9, basically. So 9 are regular residents that live here every single year, and they're basically here all throughout the year, more or less. And then another 2 just kind of pop in from time to time, and I'll talk a tiny bit more about them in a second. Okay, now of the living mammals, who are the closest living relatives of bats? You often hear people say that bats are just rats with wings, and they normally don't mean that in a positive way when people say that. But the answer to that is actually these little guys called shrews. And shrews are very common especially in grassy areas, but also in any kind of an area that has a dense layer of accumulating dead plant matter on the soil surface. That kind of creates a humid environment. And there's lots of shrews that live around here. There's like 5 or 6 species in Iowa. But yeah, they are the closest living relative of bats. Tooth structure is very, very similar. DNA structure is similar. Skull structure is similar. So lots of things telling us that if you want to call bats anything, call bats flying shrews, but don't call them flying rats. Okay, bats have massive impacts on ecosystems. So even though the average bat weighs about as much as a car key or 2 car keys, they have huge impacts on Earth. So your next question then is, what are the 3 main things that bats do that give them a big impact on ecosystems? One of those I've already said, and I talked a little bit about them being important predators of insects. We don't exactly know how big this is, but we'll talk a little bit later, so remind me in case I forget about this. But when we get to big brown bats, I want to talk a little bit about their estimated economic value from the standpoint of being predators of insects. Okay, so that's one of the things they do, so big predators. The second thing that they do is they are really important pollinators, especially down into tropical areas. Now, this isn't happening locally, so all of our local bats are insect eaters. But if you get into other parts of the world, there are lots and lots of pollinators. The guesses here, and again, this is really poorly known. You'll hear me say that a lot with bats. There's a lot that we don't know. But the guess is that probably 25% of tropical plants are relying to some extent on bats as pollinators, and it may in fact be higher than that. You know, possibly 5 to 10% of plants in the tropics are being pollinated exclusively by bats. So really important pollinating group. And the last thing that bats do then, and again, this is not something they're doing locally, but all you have to do is get down to about Mexico, and in fact, a little tiny bit into the southern tip of Florida, and bats are important as seed dispersers. And this is really big. When you get down into the tropics, lots of plants are dispersing their fruits through seeds. There's been research in Africa showing that about 80% of what they refer to as the seed rain, the seeds that fall into a recently clear-cut area, those are being dispersed by bats. Okay, just a little bit on overall design. So first of all, I love the muscle distribution in bats. Look at the enormous upper body here, and then the tiny muscles associated with the hind limbs. So somewhere in the vicinity of, depending upon the bat species, 30 to 50% of their body mass is in the enormous muscles right here in the chest, and then also big muscles kind of right in the shoulder blade in the back. And those muscles pull the wings down and then lift the wings back up. So enormous upper body. But since bats don't do a lot of getting down on the ground and sprinting around, they really don't have much in the way of hind leg muscles. That might explain one of the reasons that they hang upside down. For a bird to launch itself into flight, it needs to generate a little bit of speed. And so many birds will run across the ground or hop across the ground a couple of times to generate some speed before they get into the air. Bats, on the other hand, since they have such wimpy leg muscles, they really can't do much in the way of running. And of course, their overall posture really wouldn't make it easy to run. And so instead they hang upside down and then just let go of the feet, and boom, they're now just in a free fall. And that allows them to drop a few feet and generate some speed. You can see though the wing design here. So the wings simply are greatly elongated forelimbs. So there is the humerus bone right there. I'm hoping you can see my pointer, but there's the humerus bone right closest to the body. That's the elbow joint right there. Then out here, you've got the radius of the ulna, so the forearm. And if you look at your design, so your forearm is about the same length as your humerus. Notice that their forearm is almost double the length of their humerus. Okay, so that's one of the things they've done to create a large wing. But now, so here is the hand, and you can see the little thumb sticking up there, and the thumb actually has a claw on it. So they can hook onto things. If you ever watch a bat climb a tree, it's really interesting to watch them use those claws on their thumbs to hook and pull themselves up. But look at the elongation in the fingers. That's where a lot of the length of the wing really comes from. So in particular, the index finger and the ring finger, whoops, let's try that again. The index finger and the middle finger run right next to each other. They're right there. And the middle finger in particular is the longest bone or the longest set of bones in the body. So it starts right there, and it actually ends in, if you could see, if I actually had the entire picture on here, that the middle finger would end about there. So notice that the middle finger itself is about 1.5 times the length of the forearm. So they've elongated the forearm and then greatly elongated the fingers. And then they have this thin sheet of skin that just wraps across everything and creates the actual flight surface itself. So it ends up, in a sense, being similar to what birds have, in that it is a very lightweight structure. It's got a lot of flexibility. These bones are really very thin and quite flexible. And then you can see these little parallel strips right out here. Those are muscles. And so they have a great deal of control over the shape of the wing. Then this thin sheet of skin comes down here, and it joins and it kind of wraps around the back leg and then continues on here to the tail and then over to the other side. So this thing right here is what we refer to as their tail membrane. So that flap of skin then is the tail membrane. And they'll use that. You can imagine that you could use that like the rudder on a boat. And so you can use that to steer. They can also kind of drop it down into a scoop shape, and then it acts like a brake. But one of its main functions actually is to catch insects. And so, whoops, there goes my clock. So I guess you now know it's 11 o'clock. But at any rate, so they'll actually scoop insects up using that flap of skin, and they can actually roll it up kind of like a window blind rolls up to trap the insect inside there. So last little tidbit on this illustration is, notice that they do get holes poked in there. So this particular bat has 2 holes in its right wing. And then over here in its left wing, it's got a number of healed cuts. So just like you can heal your skin, that skin surrounding their wings or wrapping around and forming their wings also is capable of healing, and healing pretty quickly. Sometimes we'll catch bats with quite a bit of damage in their wings. It always amazes me how much damage they can handle. This slide just shows you a couple of things, showing you that bats have different shapes. And so look at this bat up here with the very short, broad wings, compared to this bat with the long, slender wings. They're folded a little bit, but they're very long, slender wings, and they're come to a point. So this guy in the upper right-hand corner, this is one of the big-eared bats. This is Townsend's big-eared bat, and this is the Mexican free-tailed bat. So those are 2 different designs. This design here, short, broad wings, is for extreme maneuverability. So these guys fly in and among tree branches, and they're actually listening for the sound of caterpillars chewing, and then pulling caterpillars off of the leaves. This guy, on the other hand, the long skinny wings, that's a design for very efficient flight and fairly high speed flight. So the Mexican free-tailed bats get way up above the tree canopy. They're often doing a lot of their foraging at 1,000 feet off the ground or so. And an individual bat will cover 100, 200 miles a night. And they're searching for these big clouds of migrating insects. And once they get into them, the insects are so thick that you really don't need a lot of maneuverability to catch them. You just kind of fly through with your mouths open. So 2 different designs of wings. And then check out this dude who is missing a tail membrane. So this is down in the tropics of Central America. And if you think about it, well, how can you get it by without a tail membrane? Well, you can steer by holding the 2 wings. I remember I made the comment that they can control the shape of the wings. If you control the right wing in a slightly different shape than the left wing, that makes you turn. You can actually flap backwards with the wings to brake. So you really don't need that tail membrane. And in fact, this guy is a fruit and nectar eater. And mostly it's a nectar feeder. And you can kind of get a sense for that because he's got a long snoot. And then you can see his tongue is so long that he can't actually even pull the tongue all the way back into the mouth. So they hover in front of flowers, jam that nose down into the flower, and then they stick the tongue in there to pull out the nectar. In the act of doing that, they end up getting covered with pollen. They eat a lot of the pollen. Pollen's actually pretty high in protein. But then, of course, they carry that pollen on to the next flower. So this is one of the little Anura Bats from Western or from Central America. One of the things I hear people talk about a lot with bats is how they're ugly. And first of all, it's kind of a dumb statement in a sense. Well, not a dumb statement, but it just indicates that you haven't really thought it through a lot. Because basically beauty is all in reference to something else. And when it comes to beauty of living organisms, we tend to, things that look more like us are beautiful, things that look less like us are ugly. At least that's what the psychologists tell us about beauty. In fact, it's kind of interesting. I don't know if you've read about any of the research into what makes a human beautiful. And it turns out that the more average you are, the more attractive you are. So again, it's just that whole frame of reference thing. So I'm a firm believer, though, that bats are beautiful because they are so beautifully designed. So if you understand why they look the way they do, that then makes them pretty. So here again is that free-tailed or that big-eared bat that we looked at a little bit earlier with just the absolutely enormous size ears. So not only does this guy have spectacular echolocation, so he's able to distinguish a caterpillar from the leaf that it's sitting on with echolocation, but it also literally can hear caterpillars chewing and caterpillars crawling. So you have to have spectacular ears, spectacular hearing in order to do that. And you also have, since a lot of your prey detection is now being done at just 6 inches away from the prey item, you have to be able to differentiate directions really well. And so the larger the ears are and the more flexible the ears are, the better you're able to pinpoint locations. So if you understand the idea of hearing, then that guy makes sense. This next guy, Centurio, you can see his label down there. Centurio is a bat that I had always wanted to see. And this is another one of my favorite bat stories. So over winter breaks, I take students to Costa Rica and Belize, and we do tropical ecology stuff. We do this every other winter. I have taken my wife down with me a couple of times, and my wife is very good at removing bats from mist nets. That's kind of an art form. It takes a lot of practice to get a bat who's badly tangled in a mist net to get them out. And so she was down there with me one year, and we had a bunch of nets set up, and we were catching a lot of bats. And I was taking out one bat, and she was taking out another. And she started to describe it to me and said, "I've never seen anything like this before." And she tried to describe it. And I kind of started to get excited, thinking, is it possibly the wrinkle-faced bat? And then she said something that I just kind of burned into my memory. She said, "I think it looks like it's been in some sort of a horrible accident." And so as soon as she said that, I knew that, yep, in fact, it was the wrinkle-faced bat. And so yeah, I suppose if you're going to consider things in comparison to humans, then that's a pretty ugly animal. But again, they're beautiful if you understand why they're built the way they do. We've now caught a fair number of these guys. They're relatively common from about Mexico down into South America. And they're fruit eaters, but most fruit eaters eat small fruits. They'll just fly up to a plant, hover in front of it. They often have great big canine teeth, they're vampire teeth, so they can grab that fruit and pop it off. Then they fly away somewhere else and eat it. This guy actually feeds a lot on larger fruits. And so it will literally land on a fruit and kind of hug it with its wings and then just start chewing. A lot of its nutrients actually come from fruit juice. And so researchers then thought, well, maybe all of this naked face and all the wrinkles, maybe that's related to fruit juice. So a researcher then just took an eyedropper with colored fluid and just put it onto the bat's face. And pretty much no matter where you put the drop of fluid avoids the eyes, it avoids the nose, and it goes right to the mouth. So all these wrinkles are basically designed to funnel the juice right down to the mouth. And it makes sense to not have any fur on the face because you don't want to have all that juice getting kind of matting down your fur. It might attract bacteria that start feeding on it now. So do you think that's an ugly bat? Well, okay, I'll buy that. But if you understand why it's built the way it is, then it becomes beautiful. Okay, now I just want to show you a little bit. So catching bats is actually quite a challenge, and it's such a challenge that it reduces the usefulness of catching bats to only certain things. And so if my number one goal is simply to find out what kinds of bats live in an area, I probably wouldn't use bat catching to do that. Or at least I wouldn't use bat catching alone. I'd use bat catching along with the acoustic work. So you can also record bats, and in most cases, you can identify them right down to species. And that combination of things is very effective. If my main goal is to try and get a sense for numbers of bats and whether those numbers are changing over time, then I wouldn't catch bats at all. I would just do the acoustic work. But if I want to know, are bats reproducing in this area? What kind of habitats are they using? What are the characteristics of the bats? Are they healthy? If I want to draw blood samples to do any work on them, then you pretty much have to catch bats to do all of those things. And so here you can see in the upper right-hand corner, you can see a big brown bat caught in a mist net. So we use these very fine nets and we string them in between poles. So down here in the lower left-hand corner, you can see there's a set of poles. This particular pole system allows me to go up about 30 feet in the air with the nets. I don't know if you can see it, but there's ropes on there as well. So there's a series of ropes on pulleys attached to the poles. This design, which is also hard to see, it's designed to be hard to see, but these are just straight old poles that the loops on the ends of the nets kind of slide over. And so this kind of a system allows me to get the nets up to 15 or 20 feet up in the air or so. But at any rate, so I string these nets up. The nets vary in length. I've got some that are only about 10 feet long, and I've got others that are about 60 feet long. Each net is about 7 or 8 feet tall, but you can stack the nets on top of each other. So you can really create a pretty impressive wall of nets. And you can see here the kinds of places where we try to catch bats. We look for forested corridors or corridors through a wooded area. Bats love to chug up and down these roadways, or in this case, it's a stream bed. They use those as basically highways through the woods. If you're over a stream, they often also are feeding on the insects that live in the stream. There's a whole bunch of insects that live in the water as young and then fly around in the air as adults. So they'll feed on those. And plus bats drink frequently throughout the night, so they'll come down and drink out of the stream. So stream beds are really the best, but roadways through forests are also pretty effective. But this also points out one of the limitations of catching bats. Bats are really active everywhere. They're active up above the canopy. They're feeding out from over the prairies. They're feeding from over the cornfields. But if I put up one of these nets, and in fact, I learned that with this particular net setup right here, you put up a big net out in an open area and the bats just laugh at you. You can just sit there all night and they humiliate you. You can hear them giggling at you because they have good eyesight and their echolocation, of course, is spectacular. And your nets are so visible in that kind of a setting that you won't catch a thing. But in here, you can hide the net in among the dense vegetation, and that really helps to make it harder for the bats to detect them until it's too late. Okay. So again, we've got 9 species of bats that live here in the local area. And then there's other 2 sets of species that just pop in from time to time. So what I wanted to do was just spend about the last 5-10 minutes or so here. I'm showing you some of the bats that I have caught at Neal Smith. Now, in honesty, I think all 9 of these are found at Neal Smith at one point in time or another. And I'll give you a little bit of a hint as to why it is that I haven't caught some of them. But the most common bat we've caught at Neal Smith is that guy, the big brown bat. It's not a very inventive name, but that's his common name. And big brown bats also, compared to what people think of as animal sizes, are really not all that big. And so a big female, and in the bat world, females are running 10 to 15% larger than males. So a big female will have a wingspan of about 13 or 14 inches or so. And a really small male will be down to about an 8-inch or so wingspan. And these guys weigh right about the weight of a car key or so. And these guys I think of as being the robin of the bat world. They are extremely common, and you find them in basically all possible habitats. Any habitat in the US that could support bats probably has big brown bats living in them. So they're just a super generalist. If you have experienced bats in your house or in a barn or in a church or a school or anything like that, almost certainly you've experienced big brown bats. There are places where you will get little brown bats living in houses also, but here, especially in central and southern Iowa, it's almost entirely big brown bats. By the time you get to northern Iowa, you start to pick up a few more little browns in buildings, but those are almost always buildings that are close to big bodies of water. Now, big brown bats are billion-dollar bats. They are such important insect eaters that this species alone is estimated to be worth at least $1 billion in agricultural impacts. So it eats mostly beetles, and in several of the beetles that it eats are important agricultural pests and garden pests. So they reduce the need to use pesticides by a little bit, and they increase yields in certain kinds of agricultural crops. And the combination of those two things is estimated to be worth at least $1 billion. If we look around the world, the guess is that bats, between their insect eating abilities and their pollination services, they're probably in the $50 to $60 billion a year all around the world in terms of their economic impact. So really important critters. Okay, now the only thing I don't like about big brown bats, well, I mean, in a sense I like it, but in a sense I don't. They're pretty feisty. And so their scientific name is Eptesicus Fuscus, but the bat biologists always call them Eptesicus Fuscus because they are just high-strung animals. They get pissed off at the world pretty easily. And if you try and bite them, they're gonna bite. If you try and hold them, they're gonna hurt you. They bite like mad. Since they eat beetles, they have big, strong teeth to crunch through beetles. So they have strong teeth. So yeah, if you try and grab these guys without a glove on, they will draw blood very easily. In fact, I've even had them draw blood through leather gloves before. Normally that's leather gloves that I've been using, for a couple of bats too many, and they've really started to wear thin. So I don't think I've ever had them bust through brand new leather gloves, but nonetheless, a very powerful bite. Okay. Oh, by the way, and people always ask me this, you're more than welcome to come and study the bats that live in my barn, and I appreciate that offer, but it's kind of like studying robins. We already know a lot about them, and there's not a huge amount that can be gained by studying bats in barns. I usually will go out and humor them and look at the bats in their barns, and sometimes I do end up seeing things that I haven't seen before, but it's studying one of the most common species on Earth is essentially what it amounts to. Okay, little brown bat. I made a quick comment on these guys. I'm not going to say much with them because they're really here in our part of the state. They're actually quite uncommon. When you find them, you're almost always near the Des Moines River or some sort of a big body of water. They will roost in buildings. This picture down on the bottom here is a little barn actually right next to the Des Moines River, down just a touch to our south. So you will see them in buildings. And when they're in there, they're often in there in enormous numbers. And so we took these pictures and then we sat outside and we watched, 400 or 500 bats leaving this barn. I don't know if you can see the details here, but this is a little baby bat right there. So this is what we refer to as a maternity colony. It's females and their babies. This is one of the bats that has been just slaughtered by white nose syndrome. So white nose syndrome is caused by a fungus. It gets them when they're hibernating. So it essentially causes their skin to itch. It'll get on their face, on their ears, on their wings, and it wakes them up. And if you wake up a bat a number of times throughout hibernation, they burn so much energy that they don't survive through hibernation. So there are places in the eastern US where this bat has declined by in excess of 95%. There's a few places that have like 99% declines. That was one of the most abundant, not only the most abundant bats in North America, but one of the most abundant mammals in North America. Super important as a predator of insects. And so in a sense, there's now research going on into what kinds of impacts are we seeing on insect populations now that this bat's numbers have been reduced so much. Okay, this is another guy that I have caught. I have caught a couple of little brown bats at Neal Smith, not many, but 2 or 3. Again, I catch lots of big brown bats. This guy I've caught a few of. So this is the Indiana bat. And the Indiana bat is, lots of people in Iowa know about them because they're a federally endangered species. And you might hear people saying things to the effect of, well, all bats are endangered, so you can't mess with them. Well, that's not true, but largely where that misunderstanding comes from is this bat. Since this bat is an endangered species, people tend to, most folks can't distinguish the bats from each other, and that's not surprising. They're hard to distinguish from each other. But most people just kind of confuse this bat with all bats. They are found in Iowa, especially the eastern 2/3 of Iowa, and from about I-80 south. And so the ones that I've caught there at Neal Smith, that's approaching the northern edge of their geographic distribution. They probably only go another 30 or 40 miles north, and probably only another 30 or 40 miles west of Neal Smith. Interestingly, these bats all leave the state for the winter, so they migrate away. And what they're doing is they're migrating to big, what am I saying here? Big caves and mines down to our south, and then they hibernate in those caves and mines. So these guys combine both migration with hibernation. Here in about, what is today, March 20th? On March 28th, I think it is, some folks from U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service are going into one of the big mines in Missouri, in Hannibal, Missouri, and they're going to radio tag a bunch of Indiana bats and then try and watch them as they leave this mine and head out across Illinois and Iowa and Missouri. And they're going to try and figure out what paths they're following as they go to their summer grounds. And then when they find them up here in their summer grounds in Iowa, then they're going to call us folks here, and we're going to go out and radio track them and try and figure out, okay, here is exactly the tree now that this bat is going to use to breed in. So we can know basically here's the path they followed, and then here's the actual tree that they're using on the landscape. So I'm pretty excited to be part of that project. Nobody really knows why this bat is endangered. Endangered bats, or endangered animals as a whole, are hard to study. There's a lot of things that you can't do to them, and it makes sense that you can't do that to them. So in this case, the guess is that it's probably pesticides that's driving their numbers down. But you're really limited. If I catch bats, catch Indiana bats, and if I want to draw blood from them and try and see if they have pesticides in them, I have to jump through all sorts of hoops. It'll take me about 2 years to get permission to do that. If I want to try and keep some in captivity and intentionally expose them to pesticides, I will not be able to do that. So there's a lot of this research that is designed, or a lot of these steps that are designed to protect the bats that actually, in a sense, end up hurting them. And so we literally don't know for a fact that it is pesticides, but that's the guess as to what's causing their numbers to decline. They're actually interesting. They kind of a mutt. I mean, they use lots of different habitats. We find them both in upland forests. They're only forests really, but they'll use both upland forests and lowland forests. They don't really care an awful lot about what trees are present, as long as there's lots of mature trees. And the reason they need those mature trees is they roost underneath the peeling bark on dead trees. So super cool animal. I love these guys. The picture that I showed right at the very beginning that has a bat sitting on the upper part of my hand is an Indiana bat. They're very mild-mannered little bats. So I've done a lot of work on these guys. And so, in fact, there is the picture of the one sitting on top of my finger. So this is what we have done with quite a few of them. So so first of all, we put these colored wing bands. The wing bands come from the Fish and Wildlife Service. We put those on. And so generally about once a winter or so, I'll get an email from folks from Fish and Wildlife Service, and they've been in these mines and in caves in Missouri and Arkansas, and they found one of my bats that's hibernating down there. So it's really exciting to learn more about where your bats are spending the winter. But then we just use surgical glue to glue on a radio transmitter here right in between their shoulder blades. And then that sends out signals that I can then detect with an antenna and a receiver. So a lot of fun to do. You learn a lot about where they're feeding and where they're actually roosting on the landscape. So Indiana bats, I would guess probably are, if we rank bats at Neal Smith in terms of their abundance, these guys are right in the middle. So I do catch them, but not in near as big a numbers as other things. Now, one of the really interesting bats here is this guy. So the northern long-eared bat. This is another one of these super maneuverable bats. They move in and among the tree branches. They're mostly insect eaters, but they'll also pull spiders out of their webs. They're able to hover in front of something and blast it with sound to figure out what it is. This is a pretty poorly known bat, but it's also a bat that is very rapidly declining. It also is getting hammered by white-nosed fungus, and its numbers have just crashed in the state. So just to give you a little sense, and this is happening right now. So last summer, So the last 2 summers, I've caught 1 northern long-eared bat between those 2 summers. The summers prior to that, I would catch 20 to 30 to 40 per summer. So that gives you a little bit of a sense for this is happening, and it's happening right now. So this fungus has moved into Iowa and is just pounding their numbers. Okay, but this is, I wanted to show you this picture because this is actually a picture from, I think this is from Neal Smith, and if it isn't, it's from close to Neal Smith. But this is one of the things I often show this picture to just kind of Joe public and ask them, do they think that dead trees are an attractive part of the landscape? And oftentimes you'll get people making the comment of, I would take that tree down immediately. But this tree, we actually traced 3 northern long-eared bats too. So we had put radio tags on them, and all 3 of them, it was funny, we caught them all 3 down in the very southeast corner of Neal Smith, and we caught them within about 2 hours of each other. We would not have guessed that they'd all be roosting together, but they were. All 3 of them were roosting in this tree. And if you look from this picture, you can see now, so it's a dead tree, and it's got peeling bark there. There's a spot right here where there's a big gap. So we sat in the evenings and we watched bats come popping right out of there and flying away. And so although we had only tagged 3 bats that were in there, if I remember correctly, we saw like 10 or 12 that were actually roosting underneath there. And presumably, since bats almost always roost in just single species groups, presumably they were all the same species. But it's not coincidence where they're the kinds of places they're using. What they really like is, so again, standing dead trees with peeling bark on them, but they want the trees to be exposed to sunlight, because the sunlight then heats these up, and it gets just downright hot underneath that peeling bark. And that's where you want to raise babies. You want babies to be nice and warm, because that's where they grow the fastest. So standing dead trees are, whenever you can leave them intact on the landscape without, endangering hikers, anybody going by, they're super important resources, not just for bats, but for a wide variety of critters. Okay, now I'm just going to show you 2 more pictures just to go real fast here. Eastern red bats, we catch lots of these at Neal Smith. Very common bat all across the state. If you've got a tree living out in the middle of a prairie, miles from the next nearest tree, it'll have an eastern red bat living. They actually roost out in the leaves of the trees as opposed to hollow spots. And they're mostly moth feeders. So we catch lots of these guys. Really pretty bats, another one of the migratory ones. And then this is kind of an interesting one. These guys also live at Neal Smith. We hear them, so I've got a little doohickey I can stick on the top of my phone, and it'll hear bats and it'll tell me who they probably are. And we hear lots of hoary bats there at Neal Smith, but we almost never catch them because they're high flyers. And so even though they're probably, one of the top 3 or 4 bats at Neal Smith in terms of abundance, I have yet to catch one there. And in fact, what are the numbers here? So in 18 years of catching bats in Iowa, I've caught almost 7,000 bats now, and we've caught 18 hoary bats, even though they're pretty common. So again, that kind of points out some of the limitations to using particular ways of catching bats. So I think I'll just leave it there and see if you have questions or if there's stuff you want to talk about. So again, from what I hear from the bosses here, you don't have the ability to actually talk, but you can then just chat your questions to us.
I see a question for us from Donna, and Donna asks, do bat houses really work?
Yes and no. I wouldn't go out and spend a lot of money on a bat house. And if you live in the middle of town, don't bother, because they seem to almost never work in cities. But if you're out on the edge of town or out in the country, and especially if you could either build one yourself or find one cheap, then yeah, put them up. They are almost always helping big brown bats. And so in a sense, you're helping robins is what you're doing. So don't get me wrong, I really like big brown bats, but they really don't need our help. But what ends up being beneficial from them is that people get really excited and connected to the bats when they have them living right there. And so that then ripples out and impacts all bats. So I think certainly, bat houses are beneficial. They get used, I don't know, maybe 25, 50% of the time in our area. but I wouldn't spend a huge amount of money doing it. We have 2 on my house, and I live outside of town, and both of those are occupied by big brown bats.
Any other questions? Please put them in the chat or the Q&A.
Oh, yeah, so I can actually read that one. Relationship between bats and COVID-19. Yeah, that's actually, if you go down further in my slideshow, there's about 10 slides all related to that. And so I could do this, I don't know, probably about 2 minutes. So yeah, there is no doubt that bats are related to COVID-19. So DNA research has shown that there's a bat that lives in southeastern China and parts of the whole southeastern Asian peninsula. That bat, which is one of the Rhinolophus is the genus, and they have a coronavirus in them that is about 96% similar in its DNA to the virus that is circulating in us. And so the guess is that that virus somehow made its way to humans, but it's only 96% similar. And the rate at which standard viruses mutate, the guess is that represents 30 to 40 years of time in terms of evolutionary change. So yes, it looks like the virus from that bat is what caused this, but there was probably some other thing going on there. The way coronaviruses, and by the way, there's tons and tons of coronaviruses. Every mammal out there has got coronaviruses in them. There's thousands and thousands of species of them. But the way coronaviruses often work in terms of causing diseases in humans is that the virus will jump from one wildlife species into another animal, oftentimes an animal that is somehow or another associated with humans. Then it jumps into humans. And so in other cases where coronaviruses have jumped to humans, it's often been like one of them was a camel. The other one, shoot, I'm blanking out on this. Pigs. There was another one. This one wasn't actually a coronavirus, but a close relative of coronaviruses. And so the guess is, and at this point it is still just a guess, that the virus jumped from this bat into some sort of a livestock animal, or maybe an animal that is used as a food source by humans, and then jumped into humans. But this isn't really, some folks in some countries have used this as an excuse. Well, we should just kill all bats. And no, that's not actually the problem here. The problem is that we're moving out into bats' habitats. It's our overpopulation and our just kind of wasteful use of resources and pushing into these rainforests, especially rainforests, that's driving this problem. So if you think about it, if you kind of picture lots of the first folks that move out into rainforest, they're often living on small farms. They often have chickens and pigs, and they've got their dogs with them. So they're taking all these other animals out there that now act as a potential transfer point for viruses from nature to make their way into humans. So this is really more of a human and how we interact with wildlife problem than it is actually a wildlife problem. But if you're interested, there's a ton of literature on this, and it's really pretty fascinating stuff.
I see another question. Speaking of human interaction, Sue asks, if a bat gets into your home, what is the best way to get them out? And how did they probably get into the home?
Okay. I have never been asked that question before. I'm just kidding. I should actually start every bat talk right up front with that, because that's what people always want to know. So how do you get them out? That actually can be a bit of a challenge. The way I generally tell people is do one of two things. If you can see the bat, if it's sitting somewhere, if it's not doing anything, put on a pair of leather gardening gloves, grab it, let it go outside. Okay. You could usually just reach right up and grab them that first time. They won't fly. They'll just sit there and watch you. But if you're kind of timid and you just kind of slowly go, then it's going to fly away, and then it's alert. And now you have no chance of catching it with your hands. So you just have to walk up real fast and grab it. Or the much easier strategy is open up all the windows and doors, turn off the lights, go to Jersey Freeze and have ice cream. And by the time you come back, the bat will almost certainly be gone. Now, keeping them out is the real challenge. And bats all they need is a hole about the size of a quarter or so to get into your house. And most older houses have 10 or 20 or 30 of those. and you don't know where they are. The bats do, but they're hard to see. So that's really the challenge, is bat proofing a house, which you could spend thousands of dollars having people do this, and it takes them a long time to do it because they have to find every single hole. But if you're determined to do this, the way to do it is in summertime, sit on the corner of a house right at sunset. By sitting on the corner, you can watch 2 walls at once. And then just kind of keep your eyes up and you'll see a bat come out. Once you see one come out in the general area, now just focus on that area and watch the next one coming out. And that's how you can now locate the holes. And then what you do is you put some sort of a one-way screen on it. So you put like a piece of window screen, just to cut out a little square of window screen, put it over the hole, use duct tape, tape it along the top, tape it along the side, but leave it kind of loose. Because then what will happen, bats as they're coming out can push their way through the screen and leave. But when they're coming back, their echolocation tells them that the hole is closed and they won't come back in. But the trick is, again, the standard house has 10 to 20 of those holes. You have to do that over and over again to find the bats. I've got my new house that we live in now doesn't have bats, but my one in Pella did, and I just lived with it. I just caught them and let them go, and I was used to it enough that it didn't bother me at all. And then I also see on here a chat about, can you ID bats through their droppings? And the answer to that is yes, but you have to be a little bit courageous. And so I pick up the bat poop and put it in my hand. And first I look at its size, and so you can make a judgment on size, and you rub it and you make it disintegrate. And big brown bat poop disintegrates in a certain way, and little brown bat disintegrates poop that disintegrates in another way. So yes, you can do it, but my guess is you may not want to do it. But the answer to that is yes, you can determine it. What often happens, and I'll tell you this because people ask this a lot too, they'll tell me, I see lots of bat feces accumulating in a particular spot, but I never see bats there. And what bats will do is in the summertime, they'll go out and they'll feed. So they're roosting in a tree somewhere nearby you. They'll go out and they'll feed for a couple of hours, 3 hours or so. Then they'll come back to a spot that's nice and warm, and they'll sit there and they'll digest food. And that's what you're seeing, is the bats are roosting there at night. It's what's called night roosting. And then they just sit there from 11 a.m. or 11 p.m. until for just an hour or so where they digest food, and then they leave. And so unless you're out there in the middle of the night with a flashlight, you're not even going to know that they're ever there. And then when they leave, they now go back to the tree that they're roosting in for the day. So you never see them, but they're there in the middle of the night is what's happening.
Well, great. I'll ask one more question. And Russ, if you're interested, drop your email in the chat too if people do have follow-up questions for you or a way to get in touch. But just one more question here from Donna, who asks, I live in Mount Pleasant on the edge of town with a 5-yard wide by 20 feet long with a couple of dead trees. I'm thinking of topping the dead trees, but leaving about 20 feet of trunk. Do I have bats, or should I remove all of the dead trees?
Let's see. Once the dead tree has lost all of its bark, it may still be used by bats, but its potential use by bats dramatically decreases. And so, what a lot of people end up having is either, right now what they're having is a lot of dead ash trees. And ash trees will hold their bark often for a couple of years. And they are used by bats. And it's Indiana bats that use them. It's northern long-eared bats that use them. Evening bats that we have around here, they use them too. So there's a number of species that do. So if you can, if you can do it safely, I would say leave them as long as you can. But as soon as the bark comes off, they're still of value to wildlife as a whole, but their value specifically to bats decreases. And bats often do roost in terms of like topping it, so taking all the upper branches off and leaving the lower 20 or 30 feet. That's still, a lot of times bats do roost pretty low. So that could potentially be a compromise situation here. But yeah, do you have bats? That's a darn good question. I've just walked around out in the woods 500 times now, and I've said, ooh, that tree looks like it's got bats. And so 100 times now I've sat underneath that tree at night and there's no bats. So it's really, really hard to say. There's so many dead trees on the landscape that what looks good to me may not necessarily look good to a bat. And so do you have bats? Possibly, but I'd say there's a decent chance that you also don't. How was that for a wishy-washy answer?
Well, thank you for your presentation and for answering questions. Very, very good presentation. We'll turn it over to Joan right now to close us out, and we'll have a little bit of time for some additional Q&A here at the end. I'll go back to my screen share.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, thank you very much. At one of your programs a few years ago, and I think I said afterwards, you can make anyone love bats, even if they hated them before. It is so much fun. It was a great evening. So hopefully we can do that again soon. I think, was Jordan, are you sharing your screen, Jordan, or?
Well, I thought I was.
Well, whatever, I can get started. Mainly, I've kind of just to end the program before we have any questions. It's just big thank yous to a lot of people. Special thanks to Jordan. So it's Jordan Oster, Rachel Rudin, and Sydney Allgreen Hunter, who are board members who really helped putting this together. This is so different than anything we've done before because we've always done it in person. So thank you to you three. We couldn't have done it without you for sure. In addition, I just want to thank all the board members. Mentioned several of them before. I think it was Jim. Don't want to forget anybody. Jim, Sue, Sharon, Jordan, Sydney, and Rachel. Also Mark Lyle, Daryl Howell, Christy Burns, and Amanda Yancey. Thank you all, because I know everybody puts in a lot of time over the years, and just really appreciate everything you do for the Refuge. And Refuge staff. You know, just thank you doesn't seem enough to everybody because they're always there. They're willing to help with our events, you know, participate in things like this, really open to anything we want to do. So, and they attend all, we always have at least one person attend all our board meetings. So that is so nice to have that connection. So thank you to all of you, all our Friends members, which I know there's some of you that are on. There again, your financial support, that helps us so much this year, especially with the visitor center being closed, the nature center. That's our other main source of income. So we haven't had that all year, over a year now. So your gift, no matter what the size is, makes a tremendous help to us to help us support all the different programs and events at the Refuge. Then the volunteers, I know some of you that are on the call are also volunteers out at the Refuge, and have helped the Friends too. So thank you again. And hopefully we'll be able to see you all soon back at the Refuge, and we can all get out there and help them. I think in closing, the only thing I wanted to mention, I guess is, we do have, right before we'll talk about this, you know, the Friends can always use some help. If anybody would be interested or know someone who might be interested in joining the board, you can either send an email to us, which is on this slide, or give me a call, and we'll be glad to tell you about some of the opportunities that are available that you can help us. My phone number, if anyone needs it, that's 515-994-2918. I'm also still have a landline also, so I'm still in the phone book, so you can always track me down. So here we do have all of our different social media addresses. And so we have the Facebook, we have Instagram, Twitter, website, and then our email. So website is, and email are probably what people, and of course the Facebook is easy to find, but website is tallgrass.org, and then our email is buffalo@tallgrass.org. So feel free anytime, please send us a message. You know, you can email us, or a lot of people send us messages through Facebook, and that's monitored too all the time. Linda Frazier, who I mentioned before, was the volunteer, but she is also our main Facebook administrator and does a great job with keeping that up to date. So I think that is probably all I had. So I don't know if there's any other questions anyone has for Russ or for Nancy, is for the Refuge or for the Friends. You can sure take a few minutes yet. Oh, yeah. Rachel just posted about spring is a great time for bison calves. That's for sure. I think Karen at the last volunteer call mentioned, you know, they can start being born already in March, but definitely like into April, they will start. And that's the way it'll be another good thing with that young ambassadors program that's coming up on April 17th. We're hoping there's some bison calves by then, so that everyone will be able to see those. Anything? Jordan, are there any other questions out there?
No more that I see in the chat, just some good thank you messages from people around the state and around the country. Thanks for being with us.
Yeah, thank you very
Joan,
much. Oh,
hi,
sure.
Joan. Yeah, if I can add, Jim had mentioned about the question about if you can collect mushrooms on the refuge. So I looked it up just to be sure. So you can collect morels and berries at the refuge, but it has to be for personal consumption. And then I also added my email address to the chat. If anybody needs any information, you're more than welcome to contact me.
All right. Well, if there is no other questions, I just really thank everyone for joining us for